Alright, Rental Girlfriend Season 2 is out right now. It's super popular. Tens of millions of copies of the manga sold. At least 2 seasons of the anime. But this show might have the most unlikable protagonist in any rom-com that I've ever seen. It seems like a blatant self-insert by the author on top of that, with what I would say is one of the worst messages of any show I've ever seen. I don't really want to get into a bunch of moralizing about TV shows and movies and stuff, but this show just encourages being the quote-unquote nice guy or a fucking simp to a crazy degree. And when I say nice guy, obviously I mean the type of guy who tells a girl that he just wants to be friends with her when he knows that he likes her, and then he gets mad at her when she actually only wants to be friends with him because that's what he said he wanted. The main character is pretty much a piece of shit. There's going to be a bunch of spoilers. I watched the anime and then read the manga up to where it's currently at, which is like chapter 244. So there's going to be spoilers because I'm going to talk about the entire series as it stands right now. If you're here, go ahead and like and subscribe and all that shit. And to be clear, I actually have enjoyed the anime and the manga, even though the story is cringe as fuck at sometimes. I think the main character is just awful, and so is the message of the show, or the series. So the main plot is Kazuya Kinoshita, I'm going to butcher all the fucking names because I always do, so sorry, is in college. He gets dumped by his first girlfriend, Mami Nanami, after a month, and he's super heartbroken over it. So he rents a girlfriend, Chizuru Mizuhara, who's essentially supposed to be the perfect woman, and her job is to act like his girlfriend and just kind of make him feel better and spend time with him. And they have a bunch of rules about what they can and can't do. So during their date, he gets bad news about his grandma being in the hospital, and he rushes there with Chizuru in hand since she's with him at the time and he's paying for her. So he lies to his grandmother and says that she's his girlfriend, and pretty much from this point on, he's a complete douchebag, and this is like a simp fantasy. There are a couple coincidences here. At the hospital, Chizuru's grandmother knows Kazuya's. We find out a little bit later that she lives in the apartment next door to him, and they go to the same college. And all of this contact outside of their dates is a violation of their rent-a-girlfriend agreement. And pretty much the way that the contracts work, he ends up spending a couple $100 every time that he wants to hang out with her, which isn't all that different from actual dating, so whatever. Anyway, she's like the perfect woman. She doesn't want to upset their grandmas, so she says okay, and yeah, she's his girlfriend. So right off the bat, this dude is spending a shitload of money to be around this girl and lying to his grandparents. Piece of shit right out of the gate. All he had to do was say it was a date, or have the balls later on to tell his grandma that they broke up, which obviously he doesn't do. And this is a rom-com, so obviously they're going to end up together in the end, which is why I say I think the message of this show is atrocious. And the message is pretty much simping pays off. So there's a couple more coincidences. They run into his friends who also now believe that she's his girlfriend. And because she's like a super nice, perfect woman, they run into his ex-girlfriend at a group get-together. And his ex-girlfriend's kind of ripping him, and Chizuru stands up for him. So pretty much the entire premise is that he keeps telling her, I'll tell people next time I see him that we broke up, and then just not doing it, while also continually renting her so that he can spend time with her. At one point, pretty early on, his friend ends up getting a rental girlfriend as well, and the girl's name is Ruka Sarashina. She ends up falling in love with Kazuya and completely throws his friend under the bus in front of him for her being a rental. She says, thank you for renting me, in front of him to make a point. So his friend liked this rental chick, Ruka, and she ends up falling in love with Kazuya, which isn't his fault. But what is his fault is that he never tells his friend about it, and Ruka figures out about Chizuru being a rent-a-girlfriend and demands to be his girlfriend for a trial period as blackmail. And also she's in high school but was somehow still a rental girl. So now he has a girlfriend who's in love with him that he doesn't give a shit about. He pretty much strings her along from this point on for the rest of the series. And so far, he still hasn't broken it off with her. Even though he did try a couple times, she denied it and he just said okay. So throughout this process, he's constantly renting Chizuru and just throwing all of his money at her and telling her that he wants to be there for her over and over. And no matter how much he has to spend and, bring her around his friends and family with lying to them, he just keeps doing it. He follows her all day long on Christmas, thinking that she's on a date, and it actually ends up being some actor friend of hers. But this is pretty much what a stalker would do, and it's also cringe as fuck because he tries to call him out on their date, even though he's not her boyfriend, he's a client. As the series goes on, Chizuru's grandmother starts not doing very well with her health, so he offers to crowdfund a movie, which is like 3 million yen, or, 30 grand, and make a movie starring Chizuru to help her fulfill her promise of being in a movie before her grandparents die, which her grandpa's already dead. So obviously this all falls completely outside of their rental agreement, and he works himself to the bone for her and ends up getting it done right before her grandma dies. And up until her grandmother actually died, she thought they were a couple. In his defense here, he actually does say that they should tell her the truth, but Chizuru decides against it. And I think both of those positions are pretty reasonable. So they make this movie, and he's spending all this time with her, and he goes and spends the night with her in a hotel, just the two of them, even though he has a girlfriend who's constantly telling him how much she loves him, and he just keeps blowing her off and then spending time and nights and money on his rental girlfriend. Iruka keeps saying that she likes him and wants to help and stuff, and he keeps accepting it instead of just cutting her off completely, which is what he should do. So after the funeral for Chizuru's grandmother, he wants to cheer her up to the point where he gets a pay advance from his job because he had to start working because he spent so much fucking money on her. And he spends the entire check taking her out for an entire day. He rents her for 10 hours and spends over $1,000, essentially making himself completely broke just to make her feel better, even though she's repeatedly said he's just a client. He's the ultimate simp. At one point in the story, Chizuru asks him to take her friend out, who's this super shy but super attractive rental girl, Sumi Sakurasawa, who also ends up liking him. This is why I said this shit feels like an author self-insert. He's got essentially the perfect woman he's going to end up with, a super hot, crazy chick who's in love with him, and then the super shy, super attractive girl who also is falling for him. And this guy is just decent looking and a fucking loser. And he also might have Mommy, his crazy bitter ex. That's kind of unclear. Even up to now. I don't really think he does, but she's a psycho anyway. Eventually, and this is the more recent manga stuff, so there's going to be spoilers here. So at this point, we're a year and a half into the story, and he still hasn't told anybody the truth. He hasn't broken up with her. He hasn't confessed to her. So he's just dragging this thing out, being a pussy and a giant piece of shit. His grandma, who he's still lying to after a year and a half, brings them on a long weekend trip. So he's on this trip with Ruka, his fake girlfriend that's in love with him that he doesn't give a shit about, while pretending that Chizuru is his girlfriend for his grandmother and his family and friends because they're all there too. And this is the climax of the story where the truth comes out that she's a rental girlfriend because Mommy reveals it like a bitch. Instead of finally coming clean, like he should have done at any point in this story, he doubles down and says that she was a rental, but she's actually his girlfriend. And he talks about how great she is and pretty much confesses to her in front of everyone. And luckily for him, at this point, she obviously likes him back, even though she hasn't acknowledged it, because that's how the story's going to go for the ultimate nice guy. So she kisses him and backs up his story, and I'm sure they're going to end up together in the end. That's kind of where it seems like it's heading finally. It needs to wrap up. It's kind of been dragging. But he's still lying to his family and closest friends all the way through the story. Every once in a while, he does something that's the right thing to do. He asks Ruka to break up with him because he loves Chizuru, but she refuses. And he still keeps letting her help him. And spending time with her and texting her and all this shit. And she tries to sleep with him multiple times. And he just keeps stringing her along. I mean, at some point, he just needs to say, fuck off. You can't come around me. If you're going to reveal that she's a rental, then fucking do it. So pretty much he has no redeeming qualities other than I guess he's nice. And he's normal looking. but he's a total introvert, a total weirdo, pretty much a coward. He refuses to confess, refuses to make any tough decisions. And there's nowhere in the fucking world that a perfect woman, which is like what Chizuru is supposed to be, would end up with a fucking loser like this. Even though that's how it's going to end up. He essentially just does everything that he can for her, is really nice to her, spends all of his money on her, and at the end of the day, he's going to be rewarded for that, and they're going to end up together. Even though there's not really any equality in their relationship. Like, he's done everything he can to get her, and she's just been like, this is business, give me your money, bitch. I mean, I've enjoyed reading the anime and the manga, like I said, but this guy is just the worst. You know, if he had other qualities, like he was really hardworking in school, instead of just really hardworking to be Chizuru's bitch, or if he was really smart and had a lot of potential after college, or he was funny or charming or something, I'd be like, okay, you know, they could end up together. But his only redeeming value is that he's nice. And he's essentially just willing to do whatever it takes to spend time with her. And sacrifice anyone that he has to and lie to everyone that he cares about just to be around her. He spends the entire series, a year and a half, lying to his grandmother and his best friends. He strings along a girl who's openly in love with him because he doesn't have any balls to end their relationship. And he has gorgeous women falling for him all over the place because it's most likely a self-insert. He's spending excess money on a girl who repeatedly says he's just a rental. I mean, a year and a half is a long-ass time to be lying to everyone that you care about, supposedly. Like, could you imagine, even lying about the one date would be kind of like awkward, but to keep that going for a year and a half is obscene. So yeah, I think this guy is just one of the worst rom-com protagonists I've ever seen. The message of this show is essentially, if you're just a really nice guy and spend enough money on a woman, the girl of your dreams will fall in love with you. I mean, if you're a guy, and in particular a young guy, the best thing that you can do to make a woman like you and respect you is to improve yourself. And this guy starts off as a fucking loser and stays a fucking loser throughout the entire series. You know, I do think it's funny and I like the story and the idea, but it's just absurd. Like, this myth that if you just are nice enough and work hard enough and spend enough money on a girl, then she'll eventually like you back is just fucking cancerous for young men. And, you know, women have this same thing where some of them believe that if you just sleep with a guy, he'll fall for you. But that's just not how shit is. So yeah, the message of this story, on top of the main character being awful, the message of this story is atrocious. So, yeah, I mean, enjoy the show. Hopefully the manga wraps up soon. It really needs to. 244 chapters, and we've taken about 50 steps forward and 100 back, but it looks like it's at the point where it's going to wrap up fairly soon, which, you know, fairly soon for manga might be 50 more chapters. I'm sure they'll create some more faux drama. Yeah, overall, I mean, I would say it's a solid rom-com. It just has the worst main character I think I've ever fucking seen. So that's it for me for this one. I don't know. My next video is either going to be about what happens after the anime in Trapped in a Dating Sim, because I read all the books and I really like that one. Or I might do a full season Obi-Wan Kenobi review, because that show just sucked. That show just never even had a fucking chance based on some of the decisions they made for the story before it even got going. So yeah, that's it for this one. Thanks. See ya.